So as I pointed out in the previous video, it shouldn't come of any surprise why a socialist would try and paint a dictatorial regime as something democratic or anything of a positive light. And what you're about to hear is something contradictory. These are the sort of people who would hold their hands up and say, well, okay, the Soviet Union was an authoritarian regime, but how could it have avoided that? In her argument, it could have been democratic in the first place, as you heard in the previous argument. Well, in this argument, she's pretty much trying to paint a positive image, a positive picture of this today with the Juche idea.
What is Juche? To oversimplify, Juche is a socialist ideology which advocates for self-reliance and isolation from other countries. It's also the state ideology of North Korea, which is kinda controversial among leftists. Juche is a Korean ideology, and it is specific to the conditions in Korea 100 years ago. According to North Korean sources, Juche was first developed by Kim Il-sung in the 1930s. During that time, Korea was colonized by Japan, and he was a member of the Anti-Imperialist Youth League. TLDR, eventually Japan starts and then loses a war with the USA, and the USSR also declares war at the last minute. They divide the Japanese empire up like this. They couldn't decide on what to do with Korea, so they split it in two and decided to deal with it later. They have not yet dealt with it. Kim Il-sung was a big boy socialist, so Stalin made him and his party the leaders of the new Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Il-sung found himself in a political and material reality which was not suited to other forms of socialism which had been tried in other places. A Marxist-Leninist or syndicalist style revolution would not have worked considering the education standards and geopolitical situation in North Korea at the time. As every socialist leader does, he made his own ideology specific to the Korean conditions. Juche has been in control of North Korea since the 50s. After the collapse of the USSR and most socialist nations in the early 90s, North Korea is one of the last countries with Cold War era socialism still in power. Juche is based on three main principles: political independence, economic self-sustenance, and self-reliance in defense. The first one means staying independent from imperialist nations like Japan, as well as independent from other socialist countries. Juche wants no country to rule over another one, since that would be a form of oppression, which Il-sung opposed because of his experiences in the Japanese Empire. The second one means as little import or trade with the outside world as possible. This is to make no country reliant on another one. All trade must be made between equals. And the last one means having enough guns to defend themselves against the USA, even without Soviet or Chinese support.
So the first question we're going to have to ask is, what is the Juche idea? As Michael Malice goes on to point out, Juche is the guiding philosophy for North Korea DPRK. According to them, the Juche idea is the guiding light for the 21st century. It roughly means national independence and self-reliance, moving one's own nation forward through one's own efforts. In another sense, Juche is the term akin to Smurf. It means whatever you want it to, and in practice works out to that which Kim Il-sung and or Kim Jong-il likes. That's why they have such things as Juche fabric and Juche magic tricks and Juche literature. So the thing to note here is the fact that socialists look at everything for face value. It's like I said before, they try to place theory above practice. Well, it's pretty much more or less the same thing. They're only going to look at the Juche idea for face value, for the words of self-reliance and independence, or what it's supposed to be, as if to say that the dictators have done it wrong. When we look further into things with the Juche idea, you can actually find that it wasn't done wrong, it's actually done right. Everything is circled around the leader. Of course, she mentioned, as you heard, about that everything to do with the independence, the political independence. She mentions about the economic independence. Well, if you shut off trade to the outside world, that's no economic independence, that's no freedom, because freedom is given the ability for the individual to be able to freely trade with other countries across the world. Well, who is it that shuts off that trade? If you're going to shut off trade to the outside world, you've got no money coming in and out of the country. You're having to set down a control, a restriction. When you set down a control and a restriction, that isn't freedom. The fact that she's trying to pass this off as freedom goes to show that she's, arse-end backwards. Control is the antithesis of liberty. If you're going to set down a control, that is the opposite of liberty. You're controlling it. It's no free. Let's just have a look at another quote. on the Juche idea. As Lawrence Reed points out in an article on the Foundation for Economic Education, he mentions, one would assume that a country's constitution is the supreme law of the land, but North Korea is not exactly a normal country. Another document breathtakingly titled 10 Principles for the Establishment of a Monolithic Ideological System is at least as important as the country's constitution. It contains 65 clauses but boils down to these principles, to which the title alludes and which every North Korean must memorise. Now this is important because this obviously hints at the direction of everything circled around this of what you see with the Juche idea, and you'll see this in a minute. So first of all, let's go through these 10 points. Number 1, we must give our all in a struggle to unify the entire society with the revolutionary ideology of the great leader Kim Il-sung, founder of the communist nation, grandfather of Kim Jong-un. Number 2, we must honour the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung with all our loyalty. Number 3, we must make absolute the authority of the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung. Number 4, we must make the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung's revolutionary ideology our faith and make his instructions our creed. Number 5, we must adhere strictly to the principle of unconditional obedience in carrying out the great leader Kim Il-sung's instructions. Number 6, we must strengthen the entire party's ideology and willpower and revolutionary unity centering on the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung. Number 7, we must learn from the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung and adopt the communist look, revolutionary work methods and people-orientated work style. Number 8, we must value the political life we were given by the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung and loyally repay his great political trust and thoughtfulness with heightened political awareness and skill. Number 9, we must establish strong organisational regulations so that the entire party, nation and military move as one under the one and only leadership of the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung. Number 10, we must pass down the great achievement of the revolution by the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung from generation to generation, inheriting and completing it to the end. So when you speak about political and economic independence, you're not speaking about being obedient to that of some great leader. You know, everything is circled around this great leader Kim Il-sung, and you could hear that from the 10 points that's addressed there. That of course isn't even the constitution. Now we'll take a look at this of the North Korean constitution, and within the first sentence as such, it actually mentions about the Juche idea. So this is the constitution of North Korea, and like I says about socialists, they always take things for face value, and if you scroll down to the preamble, you'll see the first thing it mentions is Democratic People's Republic of Korea is a socialist fatherland of Juche, which embodies the idea of and guidance by the great leader comrade Kim Il-sung. Now it mentions there the guidance. Everything is guided by that of a central planner. In other words, it's all circled around the leader, like I said. It's all obedience. Everything's to be carried out by the instructions of the great leader, and you send that for the other thing that's separate for the constitution. Everything is circled around the leader, all obedience, all the instructions carried out by that of Kim Il-sung, but these people want to have you believe that this is all to do with this self-reliance. The excuses that they would come out with, and it's always the same, they'll use the excuse and say, well, it's the dictators that have therefore failed the Juche idea, when it's really not the case. The Juche idea circles around basically this. Lawrence Reed in his article also points out, as DPRK analyst Michael Malice explained in this 2014 interview with Max Borders, Juche is a combination of nationalism and whatever you want it to mean, or more precisely, whatever the dictatorship tells you it means. In other words, carrying out the instructions of whatever they dictate. And he also mentions comrade Kim Il-sung regarded believing in the people as in heaven as his motto, was always with the people, devoted his whole life to them, took care of and guided them with a noble politics of benevolence, and turned the whole society into one big united family. The point of this, folk, is to give you a picture of what North Korea is all about, and you can see there that everything circles around the dictator. So Kim Il-sung is the one who basically leads. When you've got a leader, you're not free. The leader is the one who controls you. After all, it mentioned about obedience, it mentions about that of have the instructions carried out by that of Kim Il-sung. You even heard Viki mentioning herself about that of shutting off trade to the outside world. Was it the people that shut off trade to the outside world? Of course no. It's always the dictator. And that's what socialist regimes do, because what socialists don't understand is the fact that, and you've seen this in China, you've seen this in India, socialists don't understand for the life of them that capitalism is trade. That's why if you've no get capitalism, you've no get trade. That's why when you see these regimes like what China did, when they shut off trade to the outside world, you've seen it in India, they shut off trade to the outside world. I'm sure it was Nehru that did that. So if you've no get trade, you've no get money coming in and out of the country. Of course, Viki doesn't understand that this is an act of control. It's a dictator that's taking control and dictating and instructing their life. There is no freedom. It's no self-reliance. How can you be self-reliant and be obedient at the same time? It's a contradiction. It's all words for face value. Okay, they can call it democratic, they can call it whatever they like, but the reality of it, if you're obedient to that of a leader, a dictator, and that's exactly what it was a dictatorship, it was a totalitarian regime, it's anything but self-reliant and of course economically and politically independent. Now, Kevin D. Williamson in his book The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism also mentions this. In March 2010, North Korean President Kim Jong-il finished up a pet project of his, resolving economic difficulties resulting from his regime's failed attempts at currency reform. He accomplished this by abducting and torturing several high-ranking members of his Korean Workers' Party who were beaten so badly that they could not open their eyes or speak, as they were lashed to a post on the firing range at a military school in Pyongyang. Just as well for them, there was nothing to see except gun barrels, and nothing they might have said would have made much of a difference. Each was shot 9 times for the crime of committing treason against the people in the course of enacting unrealistic currency reforms. Hundreds more elite party officials were dismissed, very likely to be sent to labour camps along with their families. This was not Kim's first purge. In 1992, anticipating his assumption of power from his ailing father, Kim organised the execution of 20 army officers and the expulsion of about 300 others. Hundreds more military officers were killed in a 1995 purge when Kim came to formal power. During the famine of 1995 to 98, which had been preceded by an intense propaganda campaign celebrating the healthful effects of subsisting on 1 or 2 meals a day, millions of North Koreans died of starvation due to the disastrous policies associated with Kim's Juche Idea school of economics. According to the view from Pyongyang, the official state ideology, which goes by the irony of the name Kim Il-sungism, cannot fail, it can only be failed. So in reaction to the famine, the Secretary of Agriculture was denounced as an American spy and summarily executed, and thousands more officials were put to death, sent to camps or otherwise disposed of. It's like I mentioned with that of everything to do with the honeymoon phase, etc., and they're always trying to find a scapegoat. This is the true face of socialists. For example, every time socialism was such a disastrous failure, they would try to find a scapegoat, in other words somebody to blame it on, and then they would kill them, much like that of what, of course, the evil dictators of North Korea did. They executed anybody, called them American spies, etc., just killed them because socialism failed. This is what socialism is to these people. Socialism is a religious ideology that's based on faith. It's how they feel. Their feelings towards the theory of socialism, not the actual real world. They completely reject all reality. They completely reject history. They reject what human nature's about. They reject everything to do with economics, the laws of supply and demand, you name it, the economic calculation problem, all of that gets brushed aside because their feelings matter more when it comes to this of the ideology of socialism. So they're always seeking to find this scapegoat, and it's no different with that of the likes of, you know, Viki. She's obviously listening to everything or reading everything for face value when it comes to the Juche Idea. It's not actually about how things are in practice. It's not about the reality of North Korea being a dictatorship. A prime example of that was always using this projectionism, and this is something you'll find with narcissists or sociopaths, etc. They always project the blame off elsewhere. So for example, you look at North Korea, you look at that of Venezuela, you look at Cuba, you look at Chile in the early 1970s, it's always a case, oh, it's all the fault of the United States of America. Apparently it's always the United States of America's fault for why socialism had failed. You heard this example with this of Venezuela more recently in an argument with that of Mouth the Infidel, where he used up this excuse and he says that the reason for why there was a food shortage crisis was somehow the United States of America got Saudi Arabia to ramp up oil production in order to cause this crisis that you see today. But that's not going to cause a food shortage crisis. You see, the reality is, and I've pointed this out before, if you actually look at this graph here, you can see that the oil boom had lasted between 1998, just weeks before Hugo Chavez had taken over, and that of 2008. So the oil boom lasted right up to January 2008, yet the food shortage crisis actually began, as well of course the blackouts, the power shortage problem. Those problems began as early as 2003. So in other words, it was during an oil boom that you seen the food shortage crisis, and it just so happened to be, again, excuses. They completely ignore the fact that the food shortage crisis immediately followed the price ceilings. They don't want to ever accept that fact. They'll always try to find some excuse because their ideology of socialism means more to them than actual reality, than actual facts. And this is what you're always seeing. It's always a case of projectionism. It's finding a scapegoat, and it just so happens to be the United States of America is that scapegoat. It's always the American people's fault for why the likes of, Cuba failed, or Venezuela failed, or, you even look at that, for example, of a country like Chile in the early 1970s. Always the United States of America's fault. It's never the fault of their own socialism. And it was just the same as the previous argument that Viki was making for socialism being authoritarian. She's trying to say otherwise. She's trying to say that if it was democratic, if there was democracy there in the first place, then somehow it would avoid the dictatorship, etc. Socialists completely avoid bodyswerve everything they do with economic reality because it contradicts all their beliefs. For example, running the printing press, the results of what that creates is soaring inflation, their attempts to then control prices. They ignore the fact that human nature is self-interested. All of these things, and you'll never get an answer to the questions. It's just like the recent questions I had asked. I'd asked the question, okay, well, you're going to need the state there in order to get rid of the private sector. So once you've get rid of it, how are you going to keep it out of sight? You're going to need an overseer to keep the private sector out of sight. So how are you going to keep it out of sight without an overseer, without that of a central planner? They'll never give you an answer to that question. They'll pretend that they have answered it, but they never have. Another one is the fact, how's the state just going to wither away? Again, they never actually give you an answer, a specific, direct answer as to how they aim to carry out their aspirations. So everything's about their aspirations, their goal, their intentions. Your intentions, all the good intentions you have in the world, mean nothing in the face of practice. So I hope that, clears everything that you get to understand about this whole thing today with the Juche idea. So let's have a listen to Mary Viki's argument.
They would of course practically enter into alliances and call upon their allies, but this was seen as the last possible step. The country was supposed to defend itself. In Juche, the Workers' Party of Korea is supposed to educate the people in the Juche idea and thereby socialism. Then the party and state will wither away as the people reach communism. This may seem similar to Marxism-Leninism, which similarly wants a party to rule and educate the people. But Juche does not like Leninism. It criticizes Leninists for being elitist and called the Communist Party of the USSR divorced from the masses. There is no mechanism by which the Workers' Party of Korea makes sure that they stay in touch with the masses, but hey, in theory that sounds nice, listening to the people and all. Juche also has a philosophical approach, which says that human beings are the most important things in the world, and that individual freedom and independence are the most important things anyone should have. This is because, unlike anything else in the universe, humans possess consciousness, which according to Juche makes them, and the expression of their consciousness, the most important thing there is. And because states are just collections of people, the same principle is applied to countries. This means the freedom of a country shall never be reduced or subverted by any other country. which is why the three main principles are what they are.
She's using the words like supposed to. Oh, it's supposed to do this, but it's supposed to do that. And because it never happened, oh, that wasn't the true face of Juche Idea. Oh, that wasn't the true face of socialism, because it didn't turn out the way it was, how they intended it to be. And that's what socialists for the life of them just can't understand. All their good intentions mean absolutely nothing. Just because it was supposed to be this way and it's supposed to be that way, just isn't the case. And as you've seen, for everything circled around the Juche Idea, it actually paints the language of the great leader. Again, we can actually take a look at another thing of what quotes on this today with the Juche Idea. As Victor Cha in his book The Impossible State, North Korea Past and Future goes on to state, Juche was seared into the minds of every North Korean every day through repetitive indoctrination sessions. There was almost a biological and anatomical rationalization for the loyalty that went along with the spiritual. Juche's writings taught that the great leader, Sir Young Kim Il-sung, was the brain, the party was the nerves, and the people were the arms, legs, muscles and bone of the state. The two messages of obedience emerged. Without the brain, the rest does not function, therefore there must be complete loyalty. And two, independent thinking was not needed, since this was handled by the brain. The only critical thinking that was allowed was self-criticism based on guilt for serving the leader well. So Kevin D. Williamson in his book The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism touches upon this with Swaraj rule, very much similar in that sense, spiritual, etc, etc. It was something of opposite to that of what it was supposed to be. This message behind what the Juche Idea really is, it's telling you that really all it is the state is the brain. So really all you are is the arms, you're the body, you're nothing else. You're the arms, the legs, etc. You're basically controlled by the brain. And that's the message that they were indoctrinated with, that the brain is the state. This is central planner. The state is basically the controller, the dictator. So they're obedient to them. That's the message that they were given. That was the message behind the entire ideology. It was never a case of, you know, self-reliance, etc. and economic and political independence. This is exactly what we mean about theory and practice, and socialists looking at things for face value, and they obviously never looked deep enough into the Juche Idea, or if they did, they obviously missed that part out. You actually see the Juche Idea lives up to its name, where you see the brain is the state, and that being Kim Il-sung, etc., and the dictators that carried out all the mass, you know, killings, etc., all in the name to protect the name of socialism. I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add yourself. If you've got any information you would like to provide, comment in the comment section below. If you've got any questions, of course, just ask. And of course, be sure to like the video, share the video, and of course, thank you for watching, and I shall be sure to get back to you. Cheers.